the Scroll Sanity podcast. I'm Nick DeBella.
And I'm Carmela Guiol. And coming up in a few minutes, we're going to have an interview with Mehret Biruk. And Nick, why don't you start us off?
So I want to make sure we start with our flows and frictions. This moment brought to you by my dumb phone. Carmela, I'll go first. I had an interesting experience over this past weekend. We had a family gathering, and there was probably 4 or 5 generations of folks in the house at one time, from ages 5 to 85. And there were some really interesting reactions and questions from folks about my dumb phone, seeing my light phone in person. And then obviously there's some folks who know we started this podcast together. And it was just interesting to see the wide variety of reactions I heard. I spoke to somebody who's 63-year-old, and he said, I'm 63. I finally just got my first smartphone, and now you're telling me it's already not cool. And I was like, well, it's not that it's not cool, but there is a kind of growing idea, some resistance around all of what technology has been trying to sell us over this last more than a decade. And that there's a reaction to that that's maybe pulling away from it. And then I also had a 5-year-old ask me how I FaceTime. This question was actually, how do you FaceTime Nana? But I just said, well, I can FaceTime people in my family. I have an iPad. And I just thought the response was so interesting because she said, oh, I have an iPad. And it just made me go, oh, right. I guess, depending on what family you're in, you might be that close to technology at any given time. So it was definitely eye-opening and made me feel grateful for the choices I've made. And I don't know if I necessarily changed any minds, but I think I educated a few folks on the benefits of moving in this direction. How about you, Carmela? Any moments brought to you by your dumb phone?
Yeah, always. And so one thing is that now that I have this dumb phone and it's so boring and not interesting, I'm often forgetting it at home, which is fine. It's just not on my radar. And I'm like, this is great. This is what I wanted. I don't have an appendage anymore that's this device. But then sometimes it can lead to some challenges when I'm meeting somebody and I can't find them because we went to the botanical garden and it's massive and there were all these people there because of the cherry blossoms and we were meeting our friends and I had my kids and I didn't have the phone and I was just like, oh my gosh, what did I do? But yeah, so it's just not really on my radar. But then I have started learning the rural roads more in my area, and that has been really cool because I kind of had said, well, it's too hard to learn how to get around the outskirts of my town, but I can get around the city pretty well without my GPS. But now I'm learning the country roads, and that's been really cool to kind of explore instead of being on the highway, getting off the highway and getting onto those country roads.
Well, I could tell you, I know with our guests coming up, the idea of being without your phone can be a real risk. I think in one of Mehret's writings that I read earlier today, there was a talk of walking a pretty far distance in some heels in the snow because there was no bus and no way to call an Uber. And I can certainly empathize because just in the last, 4 months of having a dumb phone, I know I've gotten lost or been in a situation where I have maybe wished for the smartphone to be back in my life. I think every time that happens, I think back and go, as you said last week, Carmela, in your most recent post on Substack, the dumb phone tax, what are you really paying for when you make these choices? And so far, it's always been worth it.
Totally. So I wanted to introduce our guest, Mehret Biruk, who I'm super excited to have on. And Mehret writes the Substack called Time Spent Offline, Rediscovering the Joys of the Offline World. And it's just such a great read. I really look forward to it. It's very thoughtful. And so Mehret writes that the Time Spent Offline Substack newsletter and its weekly dispatch are a guide for how to remain human in a world of avatars, apps, and other digital traps, to choose IRL over URL, to find solace in reality from my years of adventure, plugging, unplugging, connecting, disconnecting, learning, and unlearning. And you send out an email to delete, which I love because it doesn't require you to do anything except delete it. And Mehret calls herself a lover of all things algorithm free. So welcome, Mehret. Thanks for being on.
Thank you so much for having me.
Before we started recording, we were talking about how strange this must be for you to be on, this call with us just because you are living so much of your life offline, which is awesome. So thanks so much for making the time.
Mehret, in your newsletter, you write, understanding digital tools don't cause digital addiction is one thing, but the attention economy is a whole other beast. And there's not enough willpower in the world to successfully steer away from the constant instant gratification and distraction our smartphones provide us. We need aggressive solutions to take back control of our precious time and attention. Can you talk to us a little bit about the solution you've taken and how it's working for you?
Yes. So my solution has been keeping my smartphone, but turning it into a dumb smartphone. It's very simple. You basically just need someone you trust. That can be your spouse. I use my dad, and you put passcode in screen time for iPhones. So I don't know how to do it for Androids, but for iPhone, you go on screen time and you just tweak certain settings, and you could remove Safari browsing. That's the biggest challenge for me, and that was the challenge for me at the time. I wasn't on social media, so I didn't have to do, the whole blocking Facebook, etc. And then I block also downloading apps, so that also stops me from
Oh, wow.
downloading. I can download apps, and that's why no, that's not why I got stuck that time in the snowstorm. I just didn't have my phone then. But so I can download apps. There's no browsing. So literally my phone is just I can call text, I can use maps to get around, and then I can listen to music, I can listen to podcasts, and then have like my banking apps. It's very stripped down. I can take photos, and it's just not entertaining. There's nothing to do on my phone that's entertaining. It really is a tool. And yeah, I really appreciate my smartphone because I do love having music on my commute. Like I'm in Toronto, I use public transportation, I walk around a lot. So I just don't want to give up music for that purpose. And I feel like if I had a flip phone, that would be one thing I would give up. And the maps, I really want to use it to get around. And I felt like it would be unnecessarily difficult to not have that. It was a challenge at first because if you really want to, you can get around it. So there was a lot of back and forth, asking for the password back. It took time, but it's been over 2 years now of me just having a dumb smartphone, and I cannot go back. Like, I can't imagine doing anything else on my phone that's not just call, text, get around places, listen to music, listen to podcasts, and that's it. So yeah, that's how it's a bit different from going like getting a dumb phone, getting a flip phone, the light phone. You both have downgraded or upgraded to.
And so, Mehret, if you're in a situation where you feel tempted, if you have your smartphone in your hand and you're like, I'm just going to download Instagram or I'm going to download the browser, it prompts you for a passcode that you don't actually have, right?
Yes.
Wow. Okay. That's really, really interesting because I think my biggest problem, the reason I did move to the light phone was that I set up the screen time passwords. I deleted all the apps. I tried everything I could, but then I was the one in the driver's seat. So I could always undo the screen time permissions. I could always enter the passcode to renew for another few minutes or whatever the case may be. And so that's such a smart way to do it. If you have someone you trust that, God forbid you had to do something, you could always get that password if you needed it. But it sounds like for you, day to day, it really helps you stay in the lane you want to be in.
Yeah, and it reminds me of our conversation with Jose Briones, who I think you've also spoken to, Mehret. He was talking about how you could also just not sign into the App Store, for example. But I guess, you would potentially be tempted to sign in at some other point. But I always forget my passwords. I literally can't remember my password to my iCloud account. So if I ever sign out of it, I'm kind of in trouble. But that could be something people do, just not even signing into the App Store.
Well, and what I think is so interesting about your use case of the phone is some of the needs you've identified, like whether it's ride sharing or maps or checking public transit. But music, I think, really jumps out to me. I know in the communities I'm a part of, the resistance to switching to a quote unquote dumb phone for a lot of folks is not having access to their music libraries. And I know that's one thing I'm suffering from. The light phone does allow you to download MP3s on it, but I think we live in this streaming generation and I built tons of playlists. I mean, music's easily one of my favorite art forms, and I would consume it every minute of the day if given the opportunity. My listening to music has to be down 90% since I switched because the access to it is lessened. And so I'm tempted by this idea, Murad. I don't know. I may have to think about it.
Yeah, same. I've also really stopped listening to music a lot lately. And, I have considered buying a music player, but I haven't, taken the plunge yet.
I just want to quickly add, yes, definitely something. It's just been so useful to me. And I think oftentimes people think, oh, but what if I need something? And it's funny how you just kind of figure things out. For instance, Friday I was at a friend's. It was so late. There was no public transportation and I needed to get home. So I was just like, hey, call me Uber. And she did. And then I transferred the money. You just find ways to adapt to it based on what your life needs are. I think we give it so much like power that we need these things that are just nice to have.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And it's something also I've been talking about with some of the readers on the Substack. Like somebody was saying, I don't necessarily want to replace all of the apps from my smartphone, right? I'll walk instead of calling an Uber, let's say. So it's like finding different solutions. And we're resourceful. I think we've just lost that ability to be resourceful humans because we have this device that can be resourceful for us. And something that you've been writing about is this idea of the internet as a numbing agent.
Mm.
And I just really resonated with that. And you write, I must tell you about how choosing to express my rage instead of suppression through addiction, scrolling, changed my life forever. This is the most important, maybe the only important thing you should take away from my weekly ramblings. Please, you must express whatever you are trying to suppress using the app's avatars and other drugs. So I was wondering, Mehret, if you could tell us a little bit about your emotional journey that you've been on in terms of getting in touch with your emotions once you took away this other, the digital addiction that you were using to numb these emotions.
Okay, thank you for asking me this question. It makes me just feel like, yes, like people read the stuff I write and they get it and they understand what is important. And I do appreciate what you said about we are so resourceful when we give ourselves a chance to be resourceful. That is just a big lesson that has come out of this journey to unplug and go offline. So, when I first kind of noticed that the internet, my smartphone, all that was like taking so much of my time and my attention, and I was like, I need to get away from this. I was thinking, like, once I do that, once I get off social media, turn off my phone, etc., I was like, I would be so productive. I would get to do all these things that I always say I will do, but then I'm on Twitter scrolling. But what I noticed was, well, at this point, how can I say this? It's been such a long journey, but what I witnessed was, one, I would always just find myself going back to it. And I'm like, if I don't really want to be scrolling, why do I just keep going back to it? What is the thing what am I looking for? And I knew it was like beyond that. And the more I just kind of like paid attention to that feeling, I realized I just was so uncomfortable with what remained once the distraction was not there anymore. And it's very painful to come to terms with the fact that honestly, I wasn't addicted to my phone as much as I was just maybe addicted to not liking myself, or I just really didn't like myself. And I didn't know how to just be. And that was when the breakthrough happened for me with my time spent offline journey. That's when I just really kind of like, oh, this is it. Like, I need to go on this healing journey of what's going on with me. Why do I not like myself? Why can't I stand myself? Why am I always running to my phone? Why am I so uncomfortable with just being? Why am I uncomfortable with being around people, certain people, all kinds of people? What is that? And just doing a lot of, and it's kind of a two-way street because I am unplugged. It allowed me to get in touch with myself. And the more I got in touch with myself, the more I didn't want to be in the noise online because that's too much. I don't like that. And yeah, I think it allowed me to do a lot of that work, trying to understand where that desire for escape was coming from. And that's what I truly believe. I was addicted to social media and scrolling, but any kind of addiction is that inability to be in the moment with yourself. Somebody put this really well on Substack, but I don't, or another newsletter. Yeah, like addiction being the inability to be with yourself in the moment. So it's an ongoing thing. I think I still work on that a lot, just kind of like being with myself. And yeah,
Yeah, Mehret,
it's
I
been
that
fun.
resonates so much with me because while you were talking, I realized that I think this journey for me away from the smartphone and really just all that big tech is selling to us started a lot earlier than I thought. It probably started when I started cognitive behavioral therapy for stuff going on in my life. And I think my therapist helped me recognize, like, oh, you really don't like sitting alone in your feelings. Like I was saying to you, I love listening to music. I love podcasts, but I realized I was just filling my ears every minute of the day because I didn't like sitting alone in my thoughts. And that's, you mentioned this idea of the addiction of this inability to sit in it. And I think really most addictions, or at least the ones I'm thinking of, are coping mechanisms in a lot of ways. And I think this idea of numbing, repressing, suppressing, using the phone or alcohol or other drugs, as you put it, other traps, as you put it, it is very much that, at least for me. I can't speak for why other people spend so much time on their phone, but I think for me, there was a not wanting to look inward, not wanting to look backward, not wanting to sometimes be in the present if that was a painful moment as well. So I really just want to thank you for sharing that, because I think similar to our conversation with Jose Briones, it sounds like all of us are on this journey for reasons that involve technology, but the technology is not why we're doing it.
It's interesting because I used to be very offline and I didn't get a smartphone until 2017. And I also didn't have internet at home. And I was very offline and I loved being home. And a lot of what you've written about being home and cooking and just being in the moment reminds me of that time of my life when I really could be home and anywhere that I was, I just was there because I could never be anywhere else online. But then I got a smartphone and then it's sort of been this spiral. And yes, I think you're absolutely right, Nick, about both of you about this is a healing journey and it has been for me also. But it's so funny because I used to meditate a lot during that time. I there's so many things that I used to do. I used to take walks by myself more and whatever. And then it's as you were talking, I'm thinking, wow, I just stopped doing a lot of that stuff, to be honest. And so now I am in therapy and in different things, but was the smartphone actually the thing that was making me sick? Because I wasn't really sick before it. I could be by myself and I it was actually great company. And now I just want to get back to that. But it's since 2017, I've just been spiraling into this addiction more and more. And so I definitely think I was turning towards the phone, but it was so addicting. It's just I do feel it was the driver of, like, my sickness, if you wanna put it that way.
Well, and I think that we're talking a lot about the benefits of this idea of moving into a world that's more offline, or moving our lives into a place that's more offline in an online world. Mehret, in your newsletter, you responded to a reader, and this really resonated with me because as an outgoing person, I don't necessarily think from this frame of mind a lot, but this reader was dealing with loneliness and wanted to learn more about what it's like to live offline in an online world. I'm hoping you can share your response with our listeners. And here's the question that you received. Any tips for getting started being more offline when you're already very isolated and in an overall pretty antisocial city? There's a reason many of us turn online for escape. So, Mehret, I'd love to, if you can recall how you responded to that question, and just what it might mean for folks who are on a different part of this journey than maybe we are.
Okay, before I answer that, I want to quickly reflect on Carmela, what you were saying with like your smartphone making you sick. It's funny, I've never thought about it that way, but once I started like doing the work of sitting with myself and just like paying attention, I was like, there's not that much wrong with me. Like, why was I so uncomfortable with it?
Mm.
There's not, I don't know, it makes me almost laugh because that just relentless desire to just never sit still and never just be without constantly consuming content. And I'm just like, not much wrong. And now I spend a lot of time just in my head, out and about, and it's not so bad, but like you never get to that point unless you make this huge effort. I don't know. It really is interesting. I think the smartphone and the way the internet is set up is making us sick. And if we can just step back, we can feel well.
I completely agree. I was talking about my journey with cognitive behavioral therapy, and I think I've spoken a lot with my therapist about, when I was younger, and I'm reflecting on my teenage years, but I think there's a delineation there that is before the tech movement, where I would be so much more, as you just said, Mehret, in my head, but in kind of a beautiful way. Like I used to play music. I was in a band. I would write. The things that were going on in my head, I'd really let marinate and I'd really explore them and then maybe express them and maybe share them. And that's all gone away. And yeah, we get older and the friends you were friends with in a band move away and all those things change. But I think I changed along the way. And I think part of that, it was the smartphone. Like part of it was that I turned my attention online and the dopamine hits probably that I was getting from being in a room with friends and creating art and then maybe sharing that art changed to this rapid, the cycle got smaller and smaller where it's tweets and it's images and it's likes. And Mehret, before we jumped on with you tonight, Carmel and I were talking about your work and you had some line and I'm absolutely going to misquote it, but you mentioned that a notification is a signal that someone's thinking about you. Like when you see a notification on your smartphone, and boy, that one hit me right in the heart because I think there's such a, we all want validation. And if there's a hierarchy of who wants it most, I might be pretty close to the top of that list. So I really can empathize with this idea that, again, it's been weaponized. The idea of validation of ourselves and our spirits has been weaponized by technology in a really profound way. And no wonder that's making us sick.
Yes, and when you're in it, it's really hard to see that weaponization
Yep.
because it just feels normal and everyone is doing it, and you can get validation in real life. Like you can get validation when you do something for someone and they say thank you, or when you see your friends and you're so happy to see each other, that's someone else giving you validation that your presence means something to them, right? So this idea of we're just so desperate for validation online. But I would say, like, even to this day, like getting a notification that somebody has liked my post. Oh my God, it's
Mm-hmm.
so amazing. And I'm like, why is this so good? Why do I crave it? I don't know what it is about the digital space that makes those things so addictive and just something we desire desperately. I haven't I haven't come to an understanding of that, but
Well, what's interesting about that is I think there's a level of it's been gamified or it's been distilled to its simplest. If you're in a social situation, you may get validation, but it's much less clear. It's not a red icon with a number or a heart in it when somebody acknowledges you, right? They might glance, they might make a comment. You're not necessarily sure how to read that. It's not binary. Whereas on the phone, they've made it as binary. You have 100 likes, you have a new comment, right? That
Mhm.
to me speaks volumes as to why we want it because they've distilled it into a form that is concrete, crystal clear, and scalable and repeatable. So it just happens
Mhm.
more and more. And then, yeah, the craving of it is a really serious thing.
Okay, that is so good. Yes, that to me, like, that makes sense, and I think I have a post in my head happening right now, like, as you were talking.
I can't wait
But
to read it when it comes
yeah.
out. You mentioned that you can get validated in the real world. And I want to just jump back to that question you received from a reader about someone who feels socially isolated and maybe feels the city they live in is an isolating place. But to your point, I think a lot of us have this fear of if we get rid of the technology, if I get rid of my phone, then how will I still get that validation? How will I still connect with people? How will I not feel alone? And I think you have some really good tips as to immerse yourself where you live, get more involved in your community or just even on your own, but show up for yourself in a way that I think is really powerful that can maybe change that mindset that, oh, the phone is my only connection to validation and feeling less alone.
Yeah, the thing with people, like, what's the expression for it? Like, you feel like, well, I need to be on my phone to be connected, but
Mm,
because I spend so much time on my phone, I feel disconnected from reality and my surroundings. So it's like you get kind of trapped in that space. So when I got that question from a reader, just asking, I'm lonely, my family's so dysfunctional, and I live in antisocial city. And I remember just thinking, yep, yep, yep. I understand. I get it. It sucks. And another point I always try to make in my writing is it is hard work. It really is hard work because
Mhm.
the world is going one way and you're trying to go the opposite way. And you have to constantly even validate yourself for your choices, for having a light phone, getting a flip phone, getting off social media. It's just constant. You're not being validated by society as it's
mm,
functioning now. And a lot of these things I wrote about, and I will talk about them, but I had to kind of like try things here and there, sometimes getting lucky, just showing up, and then something is working, something is not working. So it really has been a journey, and it takes time, it takes effort. You have to be patient. And if you just the moment you feel uncomfortable, if you're going to run to the thing that's making you sick, your smartphone, social media, then things are just either going to take so long, or you're just never going to get to the other side. And the other side is beautiful. It's wonderful. I Every day I just say to myself, I'm so glad I made the decision to get offline, because I think it has fundamentally improved my life, who I am as a person. I'm not saying those things couldn't have happened if I was on social media, but I doubt it. So the first thing so this was also resonating with me, just to give a background, because about a year and a half ago, I moved back to Toronto, and I was starting over from bottom. Like, I moved back with my parents.
Mm,
I didn't have a job. Like, I was just in a really bad position. Like, a lot of my friends either moved away from the city, started their life, and I'm just like, what's going on? And I'm also trying to be offline. I'm still like, I'm writing time spent offline at that time too.
mm,
And so I was surprised, because the reader said, all your tips are for people who have a lot of friends and good relationship with their family. And I'm like, what? Me? Who are you talking about? But so I was like, okay, like now I can see that I do feel that way. Like, I have improved my relationship with my family. I have, friends and social life, and everything is great. But like, there was a time where it didn't feel that way. So I was like, okay, let me give this what I think worked for me when I was at that place. And the first thing I remember doing was signing up for group fitness class. I've been doing that for a while. That started with when I first got off social media in 2017. And I was just kind of like, okay, what to do with my time? And I found a fitness studio, like they do like yoga classes, Pilates, etc. And it was just kind of this thing, like I just kept showing up to, because I would be like, it's 6 p.m. and I'm like, oh, I don't want to be here. I mean, I don't want to leave the house. I don't want to like, and then I'm just like, oh, but I know what's going to happen if I stay home. I will be scrolling on
Mhm.
Reddit. Like, I know
Mhm.
what's going to happen. And I would just feel so
Mhm.
like angry. I'm just like, no, I'm leaving the house. And also, what I liked about the fitness classes was like I just needed to show up, and then there was an instructor that told me what to do. So the friction wasn't as, "Oh, I have to get to the gym and then I have to like think about the workouts," and then so that
Mhm.
helpful when you think about like the things you want to do. Try to make it as less painful as possible. Don't add too many steps that are just painful and they build the resistance and you're just like, I'm staying home.
mm,
Because I can convince myself, let's just put on our workout clothes and let's leave the house. But it's if it's, oh, and then let's think about the workout we're gonna do, and then etc. So anyway, so when I was back in Toronto, I was like, okay, I know what works. Got the fitness studio thing going. And what I love about it, yes, fitness is good, move your body, etc. Movement is great. We all know that. But you are part of a community, because you're showing up consistently to this space with a bunch of other people showing up to it consistently, working towards similar goals. Like, you have that thing in common, right? Like, we're all here because we like our 10 a.m. Sunday stretch class. Like, you already have an in, right? Like, you already
Mhm.
have a common ground. And at first, it's terrifying. I wrote about this. Please read the post on time spent offline. But at first, it's going to be terrifying. Like, you don't want to do it. You have to push yourself. Again, it's not easy work. So, and I also love that it's just like consistently you see people that you acknowledge each other, but it's not a lot of labor that goes into it, right? It's not like your family, it's not like your friend.
Mhm.
I think one thing I do kind of that one thing that makes it hard to go flying in this society, I'm realizing now, is like how much effort it takes to be around people, like to spend time with people. I'm like, oh my God, like I really have to make plans with the friends 3 days
Mhm.
in advance if I'm lucky, but sometimes a week ahead. It's just like there's not a lot of opportunities to just hang out with people. Like, you just show up like
Mhm.
Thursday,
mhm,
this, whatever. So if you're in a community of whether it's like a gym class or, painting class, whatever you're doing, it doesn't take a lot of effort to be around people. You just show up to this thing.
mm,
So I think that's like a very like easy thing to not easy, but a simpler
Mhm.
way, right? You just, I don't know. What do you like? What are you into? Trying to find a
Mhm.
class, try to find a community of people doing it. Everybody's showing up. Like it's an easy thing to do. So that was like the first thing I start thinking. And then the other thing was like, okay, what else did I do? You have to be willing to do things by yourself, especially if you have no friends. Again, that whole like, it takes time. It's going to be hard. Yeah, it just is. It's you. If you don't have friends or if you're feeling isolated from people, you have to be willing to go out and do things because that's also how you're going to meet people. And hopefully that can become a friendship. And also, I realized like when you do things, whether you do it with by yourself or with other people, I don't know, like before you know it, you start realizing like, oh wow, like my life is interesting, right? Like when you're like just chatting with people, you can be like, oh, last time I went and did this or this thing, like it does make a big difference. So just doing things by yourself is so important.
What really resonated with me about this question of somebody who's saying, I feel alone, the internet, my smartphone is my conduit to the connections I feel I have, but doesn't sound like they're super fulfilled in the life they're living in that paradigm. So how do they get out of it? And what I love about your suggestions is some of it is about redefining yourself. If you feel alone and like you don't have friends or interests, well, then go out in that world, show up for yourself, be alone, be in it, and maybe you'll find some new interests or find some. You'll learn quickly what you do and what you don't like. And what I love about whether it's a group fitness or really just a group experience is it puts you in a social situation, but it's also an orchestrated situation. It's not like
Mhm.
amorphous and not clearly defined. And how do you navigate it? It's, as you said, the instructor, whether they're a
Mhm.
fitness instructor, an art instructor, will guide you through that process. And even if you go to 3 or 4 and you only have small talk or hellos or whatever, you become a familiar face. You get more comfortable in the situation. And, I think that speaks to an opportunity for somebody to redefine who they want to be. And I
Mhm.
feel like you've given really clear action steps as to how to at least make that leap. And it sounds like it can be really scary, and certainly if you're on your own, but it sounds like for you, it really paid off. One of the things, Mehret, I really wanted to make sure we talked to you about, because this is, I think, in your writing, the thing that resonated most with me. And Carmel and I know have talked about it off the podcast, on the podcast with other guests, is, there's this idea of this disconnected existence we're living in that I think it's being sold to us as connection and convenience and on demand access right through the technology platforms and the massive corporations that put these things in front of us, weaponize the dopamine and our need for validation. In your writing, you talk about how angry you can get about these things or just other things in your life. And, as somebody who's definitely struggled with my own anger issues, and when I really talk about these things and I think about them, they can really fire me up. I'm curious if you could just talk a little bit about, how that journey of your own anger, your exploration of those things has evolved, and if you've learned anything important from that.
That's a tough one. And I find it's easier to write about these things than to speak about them because my writing is a very different process for me, right?
Mm-hmm.
I access a different part of myself, but when I'm sitting here talking to you, it's like a different side. So, and to be vulnerable and really get to that space. But I would say it's an ongoing process. Like I haven't arrived. Don't think you ever arrive, but I've come to such a good place of like where I feel like I'm in control of my time, my days, my attention, and I just have built this beautiful life for me outside of the digital noise. And I'm not angry anymore because I get to just look around and be like, no, I actually kind of came out of this
Mm.
like winning. You know what I mean? They said I needed LinkedIn for my career. Okay, a few years down the line, I don't.
Mm.
They said, oh, I would need social media to be more connected, and that's just life now. And I realize I don't. I'm actually better off for not being on social media. And I have, I just feel I have such a beautiful community I'm a part of, friends, family. I've healed a lot of like junk that I was carrying and I was just ignoring it by scrolling. So the self-compassion that is coming up in my writing and all that is because I've won the fight against my attention. I feel like I've claimed victory. And yeah, it's just easy to be like, now I'm not upset with social media. I'm not upset with my phone because my phone is just a tool. I'm not on social media. It doesn't even it's so funny because like sometimes I'm out with friends and then maybe they're like, oh my God, let's take a photo. And I'm just like, oh yeah, that thing. And but it means nothing to me. So it takes time. Like it took a long time. Like I have been serious about this journey since 2016. And it wasn't until 2022 I start to feel this way. So that's 5 years of just like back and forth, being so angry, frustrated, annoyed at myself too, right? Because I'm like, I'm so weak. I'm so stupid. I know what to do. Why am I not doing it? And then just kind of like, okay, so why am I not? And then getting to that like deep place of there's something else. It's beyond the phone. It's me not liking myself and not willing to be with myself. And then really doing that work. And then I was just like, oh, ew, I don't even want like the phone and the social media. I don't even want it. And then, yeah. Oh, it feels so good. I cannot explain how good it feels on this side of just, when you get out of a very toxic relationship with someone you
Yes.
thought you needed, and then you like prove to yourself, you're like, I
Yes.
don't need you.
Yes.
Like,
I'm
that's
better
it.
off. That's
Yes.
amazing, Mehret. That is such an inspiring story, and for us, and I'm sure for all of our listeners too. Like here you are, you're on the other side, and you're in a great place. And I love that you've shared this like healing journey with us, and I want to be where you are. And I feel myself getting there, so it's very, very inspiring.
I couldn't agree more, Carmela. I've loved every episode we've done. We've talked to some really interesting people, but I think this is the most hopeful I'm going to be walking away from an episode from. So, Mehret, I want to thank you from the bottom of both of our hearts for being on the show. Where should listeners go if they want more of your ideas and insights, Mehret?
First, I do want to say thank you for having me be part of this conversation. And Carmela, I read your newsletter and I see how you process things, and I do appreciate it. You come from it from a specific point of view. And Nick, thank you for giving me that idea of the gamification of things. But anyway, this has been such a beautiful conversation because I'm not just like in my head. I'm not just, there are people who get it, who understand, who are trying to do these important things. So thank you. I appreciate that. And also, I always say you can learn a lot from paying attention to yourself and your reality. I honestly do believe that. But if you want to hear more of my ideas and insights, Time Spent Offline is the newsletter. I send out an issue like every Tuesday, 5 things just collected throughout my week, things I've read that is like relevant to just going on this journey of disconnecting and being in reality and just getting whatever you need from that reality.
Listeners, Time Spent Offline on Substack. Subscribe, subscribe, subscribe. You will not regret it. And speaking of Substack, Carmela, what's new for you on Substack?
Well, I'm going to have a guest post on Mehret's newsletter, so check that out.
Amazing. If you have questions or insights or ideas you'd like to share, you can connect with us on Reddit, Instagram, or Substack @ScrollSanity. Thank you so much for listening.